The ECB has announced today that, like the Federal Reserve and Bank of England before it, the European Central Bank will not be cutting the key interest rate beyond the current level of 0.75%. Speaking to me is Ken Wattret, Chief Eurozone Economist at BNP Paribas, London. So Ken, the rate cut wasn't really the shock and awe plan that investors had hoped for, was it?
Well, there are two elements of ECB policies. There's the conventional policy, which is interest rates, and then there's the unconventional policy, which can incorporate various different aspects. What we know is that the decision has been made to leave interest rates unchanged. That's no big surprise. We had a rate cut just a month previously, and I think with limited ammunition available, the ECB wants to assess what's happening in the economy and decide whether they can shift rates a little further downwards. I think it's not very long in coming before we do see rates fall, but that's more likely to be in tandem with the next round of economic forecasts, which will be coming in early September. The real issue for markets is what happens on the unconventional policy measures, for example, the willingness of the ECB to buy more sovereign debt.
You mentioned there Spain and Italy. In terms of hopes for monetary union, with Bundesbank's consistent criticism of any measures suggested by the ECB to ease the burden of monetary supply to Spain and Italy, and Jens Weidmann's remarks yesterday that the ECB should not overstep its mandate, are we in fact moving further away from this goal? And what impact could this have on the euro and its credibility should these disagreements continue to spill out into the public domain?
Well, there are long-standing tensions between different actors in this process. Within the Governing Council, there are ranges of different opinions on different issues. That's not unusual for a central bank. It's amplified in the ECB case because of these differences running along national lines. I think the Bundesbank is trying to push back to try and encourage the ECB to act within its mandate. That central bank speak for trying to dissuade Mr. Draghi from embarking on a round of much larger scale sovereign debt purchases. The Bundesbank feels that that is going beyond the realm of monetary policy and is potentially inflationary. I have to say other central banks probably see the risks in a different direction and therefore are keener for the ECB to consider those options. Where we are at the moment is a kind of stalemate. Markets desperately want the ECB to consider doing unconventional things to try and have a big impact on market conditions, to try and turn sentiment around in the debt markets and try and resolve this crisis. Within the ECB, there are some factions, including the Bundesbank, which feel the emphasis really should be on politicians to do the necessary reforms, and that is the best route to improving market conditions and resolving the crisis. And at the moment, we have differences of opinion, and I think they're likely to persist for quite some time.
Speaking of politicians, Italy's Mario Monti and Spain's Mariano Rajoy held a press conference just ahead of the ECB press conference. Investors seem to be taking several implications from this. Are there any?
Well, one of the issues here is whether governments in Italy and Spain are willing to request assistance through the EFSF and ESM, which would actually potentially open the door to the ECB to expand its sovereign debt purchases, and that could be a real mood changer for markets. I think the problem is, from a domestic political perspective, both in Italy and in Spain, there's a huge stigma attached to a government having to request support. So that's standing in the way of potentially a concerted response to these stresses in markets and worries about the crisis. I think more generally there is an anxiety that the Spanish government, particularly, and to a lesser extent the Italian governments, are running into consolidation fatigue, that there is only a certain appetite for fiscal adjustment, i.e. tax increases and spending cuts. And people are becoming tired of this. So it's very difficult for governments to continue to press on with these reforms. We've seen that tension very explicitly in Greece, and now it's spreading to other countries.
Ahead of this announcement, the euro was up, crude was up, US stocks and European shares were all up waiting for this decision. What can we expect now, do you think?
Well, I think Mr. Draghi a week ago prompted a risk-on mood in markets by saying that the ECB would do whatever it takes to resolve this crisis. There'd been a perception before that the ECB was very reluctant to take the kind of radical measures that could stabilize the situation. So he's inflated expectations, he's raised the bar very high. Now it's up to the ECB to deliver, and that requires the ECB to make absolutely clear that it will deliver on the commitment to do whatever's necessary. And the first stage of that, I think, is for people to see the ECB's willingness to continue to intervene in sovereign debt markets, and we're living in hope that that's what they'll do.
Ken, thank you. Well, ECB President Mario Draghi continued to disappoint in the press conference held shortly after the rate decision, failing to announce any definitive measures to address concerns about the burgeoning sovereign debt crisis. While the ECB chief did threaten to resume SMP, it was under the precondition that EU leaders must implement structural reform and fiscal consolidation, as well as deciding how to use the EFSF and ESM bailout funds to purchase sovereign bonds. The Dukascopy TV team will be back shortly with more exclusive interviews. Goodbye for now.